It is Black History Month, and there's a football history walking tour that is done by Aodhán Ríordáin and Gary Cooke, and I'm delighted to say both Aodhán and Gary are with us this morning. Aodhán, I might start with you first. It is Black History Month. Tell us a little bit about your football walking history tour and what you're doing this month.
Well, myself and Gary have been doing this for the last year or so. I suppose it was born out of lockdown. A lot of people had very little to do, no matches to go to, and we've always been interested in the conflict between soccer and GAA over the last 100 years, and how, official Ireland really looked down its nose on soccer. And if you look at Croke Park, and we walk from Croke Park to Daly Park, it's actually physically in a soccer area. It's like an alien spaceship. In a very much a soccer area, in an area but not of the area. So if you think of all the internationals that come around there, Jack Byrne, Curtis Fleming, Wes Houlihan, and some names that you mightn't be familiar with, like Tom Farquharson, who was an IRA man who became a goalkeeper for Cardiff City in the 20s, or other names like that. Paddy Moore, who played in the 30s, was an incredible goal scorer and had a fight with alcoholism until his early death. So there's a lot of conflict between the two games. The time that an Archbishop of Dublin tried to cancel a soccer match in the 50s. All that history of how young people in Dublin and around the country, if they played soccer, they were made feel not particularly Irish if they went to certain schools. So we talk all about that. The time that Liam Brady had difficulty in school, John Giles had difficulty in school. But what's also part of the history of the Irish soccer team, it's often reflected parts of Irish society that we didn't really want to talk about. The Irish abroad, for example. And in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, we were a little bit sniffy about players playing for Ireland with English accents. We didn't really understand the nature of Irishness in the UK. And certainly when you're going through the tour, you think of all the names of people who have suffered, who are Black and Irish and suffered racism. So Curtis Fleming is from Ballybock, and he's spoken about racism. There's a player that people mightn't be familiar with, a guy called Ray Keogh, who played for Drumcondra. He's regarded as the first Black player to play in the League of Ireland. He grew up in a mother and baby home, and he managed to play on the Drumcondra team that beat Bayern Munich in the European game in 1962. That's the programme there. We take out programmes and jerseys as we go along. And then, of course, Chris Hughton, first Black player to play for Ireland. He played in Daly Park in 1979. That was his debut. And players like Paul McGrath as well, who's spoken about his battles with racism as a young Irishman too. So that's his debut against Italy in 85. So, while we're talking about the history of these two games, which is very much the history of the search for Irishness, Black history is a very big part of that. And for Black History Month, we wanted to place a particular emphasis on that side of things in the history tour this Sunday. And
Gary, were you always into this part of the Irish football history, or is this something that you're kind of uncovering as you go as well?
Well, certain aspects of it I was always completely aware of, and particularly, Dunphy talked about it a lot, about the difficulty of playing soccer in the 50s in Ireland, and how they were sort of considered second-class citizens and so on. So I was aware of it, and I was aware of things like the ban on people playing foreign games and so on, and what that actually meant for some people who were thrown out of school before they did their leaving cert because they're caught playing soccer. So it's certainly something that I've been aware of for a long time. Yeah.
Dunphy's from Drumcondra, I think, as well. So you obviously take him in as you go, do you?
Yes, he is taken in, absolutely. Well, he spoke very eloquently about it. He describes it, I think, extremely, extremely well. How difficult it was at that time, and also both the social and the political and the social aspects of playing football at that time. Kind of a lower class game, as he said on RT one night. He goes, "Yeah, we were spada," and like. It sounded kind of almost comic when we used it in Après match quite a lot, but that is kind of the reality of it. He taps into something that's very real.
Aodhán, it's interesting that there's definitely a belief that street football is dying away. When you're walking from Croke Park to Daly Mount, you're walking down a lot of those red brick streets where, if there were no cars, the kids would actually be able to play football. And yet we are still seeing the area produce Jack Burns, and there are a number of other younger players who are still coming through. So it is still a football hotbed.
It is, and by the way, if you do the tour, your Eamon Dunphy impression will improve greatly. I know mine has over the course of the last year. So by the time you're finished, you'll be much better. Yeah, we talk a lot about Eamon, about John, but players like Patrick O'Connell, who came from just beside Croke Park, who then went on to play for Manchester United and then to manage Barcelona. And people aren't necessarily familiar with Patrick O'Connell. Alex Stevenson, who came from Richmond Road as well, a few doors down from Eamon Dunphy, and his first cap was in 1932, but his second cap, I should say, was in 1946, 14 years of a difference. And he taught it because he was Protestant. And that was part of the sort of the sectarian history, if you like, of the 1930s and 40s in Ireland. That wasn't the case, just Everton wouldn't release him. But yeah, in around the stadium, and this is what I've always been interested in, because I used to teach in Sherrow Street, and Croke Park and Gaelic football and Gaelic games was pretty irrelevant to those children. They were soccer kids. Soccer was what they were interested in. So the likes of Stephen Elliott, the likes of Wes Houlihan, Kenny Cunningham, all these names come from around Croke Park, and yet their game, their culture, their heritage was soccer. That was the game that meant most to them. That's how they sort of interacted with the world. And yet official Ireland really looked down on it. And it's only since the 1970s and probably into the 80s that the education system has in any way embraced it. And even to this day, if you think about education, rugby has been in second level schools for 100 years and more. GAA has been in primary schools and secondary schools for 100 years and more. But soccer still has a kind of a difficult relationship with the education system. And that's a lot to do with social class as well, because as Gary talks about from John Giles's book, if you played soccer, you were considered to be a corner boy going up to Daly Park. And we can't pretend that that's completely gone from Irish society.
Who goes on the tours?
Who goes on tours, Gary? A lot of bored soccer stars.
There's a wide variety of people who go on the tours. I mean, some of them are very definite sort of League of Ireland fans and go to a lot of matches. And some of them are just regular kind of, husbands and wives and families. And, so there's a big cross section of people who go on it. And, as I know from Après Match, Irish people are definitely into comedy and they're into sport hugely. So, they get a little bit of both on this tour. It's mainly a history walking tour. It's mainly about the history of it, but obviously it's got to be vaguely humorous as well. But yeah, all sorts of people go on it.
So we go from 1916 to we say 1916 to Jack's Army, but there's a lot of people from that revolutionary period who were soccer people, members of the squad, Oscar Traynor, who was very much a soccer man, but felt ostracized as a soccer man. So we talk all about that and Bloody Sunday, the fact that there was a steward in Bloody Sunday who was banned and saw all that carnage, but was banned for playing soccer in 1924, and a guy called Joe Steins. So all these little histories and little stories of the conflict between the two games. The fact that the first president of Ireland was banned from being a patron of the GAA because he attended a soccer. There's lots of little stories that for a modern generation is probably a little bit strange, but was very real in the search for Irishness through sport over the last 100 years. And Black history is very much part of that. And it's really refreshing, I suppose, now, when you think about the Irish team taking the knee in Hungary, how in 1936 the Irish team did the Nazi salute in Daly Park, not knowing what it meant. But this is all part of the history of how sport and politics intertwines.
It's interesting that you use the phrase ostracised there, Aodhán, and I wonder, Gary, like from your perspective, looking at people like Eamon Dunphy and John Giles down through the years, how much, not just their footballing ability, but their personality and the people we got to know as pundits was informed by an us against the world sort of mentality that came with being a young footballer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's undoubtedly true, and they talk about it like there's a sense, I suppose, from the Dunphy and Giles thing that there's almost a sense of ownership, and it goes right back to, say, the 1990 World Cup when Dunphy was going off on one because I remember the Ireland-Egypt match, and he was giving out yards about how Ireland were playing. And I understand that, because he felt that he was coming from a place of, I guess, authenticity and a real struggle with playing football. It wasn't a slam dunk. It wasn't like it is now, where you might play, GAA and soccer and all sorts of other games as well. It really had a stigma. So I presume there was a real sense of coming through something, and also because they're, basically from rougher neighborhoods, and soccer was the the underbelly of society, and kids who didn't have a huge amount of any kind of, they weren't part of official Ireland, as Duffy talks about. So yeah, absolutely a big struggle, and with that, and then making it as well in England, which at the best of times, I say, is an incredibly difficult thing to do. I think a lot of people don't understand probably just how difficult it is to actually make it in professional football, and how difficult it is for loads of kids who don't ever make it. So these guys have really come through a journey, and you had the sense of that journey. And of course, at times, it sounded a little bit, I suppose, as they were the only ones who ever played football, but that was what made it so interesting. They're great. They're just fantastic.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but there's a play like Con Martin is a classic example. Con Martin is somebody who was a Gaelic footballer, played for Dublin in 1941, wins the Leinster Championship with Dublin in 1941. They discover he plays for Drumcondra in soccer, and they wouldn't give him his medal until 1971. Goes off, plays for England, or plays for Ireland against England, scores a goal in that famous game at Goodison Park. Irish enough to wear that jersey that day, not Irish enough to get his Leinster Championship medal. And this is the stigma that was attached to soccer, less so rugby, because I think rugby was it was an elite game, played in elite schools, it was 32 county, it was amateur. It didn't have the stigma that soccer had, because there was the social class element of it. And all those stories of what happened to Con Martin, the way that John Giles says that when he left Ireland as a 15-year-old, he said he didn't feel Irish, because he was constantly being reminded in school that what he was doing wasn't Irish. And so we talked a little bit about the Christian Brothers and where they were coming from and why they felt so strongly about it. And, we talked about the Liam Brady story about how there was a conflict in his school between playing a Gaelic football match for his school and representing Ireland in a schoolboy international on the same day. And as Gary says in the tour, you'd expect the school to celebrate this, but the school threatened him with expulsion if he played the soccer match.
Which he did, of course.
Which he did. But so we need to know where did this resentment come from? And part of it is about, Christian Brothers going into the order in their early teens, probably trying to escape poverty from parts of the country that viewed soccer as having a link with the British Army, because there's pockets of soccer around the country, garrison game, that kind of thing. And all these prejudices that came in. And these kids just wanted to play soccer, just wanted to be who they were. But the Irish education system did not reflect who they were. And so there's whole generations of that. And still today, I just find it really interesting, the whole Croke Park dynamic and the number of players that have come from around that stadium who play for Dublin, which I think is pretty small in the last 100 years, but the numbers who play for Ireland is much higher. In men's and women's football, Libby O'Toole as well is another player from the area who's graced the Irish jersey.
And then you finish up at Daly Park, which obviously is this kind of literal metaphor for the state of Irish football. Like the beginning, the green shoots of regeneration are right there. The local activity around the club is actually a beacon in Irish football, and yet they still haven't been able to get the funding over the line properly. And maybe we're closer to the regeneration of that now than we ever have been. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's the type of thing that maybe gets kicked down the road a little bit.
Well, we talk a little bit about that. Myself and Gary talk about this, and I talk to soccer people about why soccer still isn't politically important. And I see that in Leinster House. Just the kind of sway that other codes have and other games have over the political system that soccer never has had. And part of that is because of the mismanagement of the game from within the FAI. Part is because traditionally the type of people who played the game were effectively powerless. And emotionally and financially and lots of other ways, Irish football people have turned to England with a real chip on our shoulder, complex about ourselves. For the last 70, 80 years, we follow English teams. We don't respect a player unless he's played in England. We don't respect a manager unless he's managed in England. And that chip on our shoulder is something we're really going to address, because myself and Gary feel that there's huge appetite for a proper domestic Irish football industry, but people don't believe it. So what's happening with Daly Park and also what's happening at Cooke Park, there's huge growth in the game. I was at the Shells game there on Saturday, first ever televised Women's League of Ireland game. The buzz around Daly Park at Bowes games is much better than I was in the 90s. But still we have this sense that we can't be serious about a domestic football industry. And I think we have to challenge that. And we have to challenge politics to care about it. Because going back to the Black history stuff, what football is doing in Ireland for integration, and you can see the ethnic mix of players representing Ireland today, is really exciting, of this new Ireland, of what really it means to be Irish in the modern day. And I really think the state and politics needs to back soccer more, and needs to pressurise soccer more to do more to lift people, because it really is an incredibly powerful game. And we can see that on the tours. And Gary has said we got people from all ages and all generations who come, who love the game, who feel really strongly about it, and they love the nostalgia that we talk about. But it's not just about nostalgia; it's also about the future.
So give us the sell if anybody wants to go on the tour. It's this weekend, is it?
Yeah, well, we have them every weekend, but we're doing a particular emphasis on Black history this weekend. But if you could email footballwalkingtour@gmail.com, and we'll reserve a place for you. And it's at 12 o'clock on Sunday. We go from the Croke Park area up to Daly via Cooke Park and via Eamon Dunphy's old house. So that's an important part of the whole experience.
How much is it?
It's free. It's a free tour, but we do ask for. We have to take out an insurance claim in case somebody finds Gary that funny that they fall back under a car. So we do have we have to get an insurance policy. So we just ask for a contribution to that. That's all.
All right, good stuff. Aodhán, Ríordáin, Gary Cooke, enjoy the tour this weekend, lads. Thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks very much. See you.